Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Seek This Week. Every Thursday night, we hold a town hall meeting. We provide updates on federal and state educational guidance. We do updates on mental health, evaluations, transition planning, community issues, and other important educational issues that are important to families of children with a disability. We also try to answer as many questions as we can from our leaders that are child advocates and attorneys within our state that serve on our board. I'm Barbara DeStinti. I'm the president of SEEK. I'm a teacher, and I'm also the parent of a child in special education.
I'm Julie Swanson. I'm a special education advocate, and I am the parent of a 25-year-old young man who has an autism spectrum disorder who has gone through the special education system.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Forte. I'm a special education attorney out of Shelton, Connecticut. I serve on the board of as its secretary.
I think Jeff just froze. Let's go to Jen. Jen, you go.
I am Jen Laviano. I am a special education attorney in Sherman, Connecticut. I am also the co-chair of the Attorneys Committee for COPA, which is our national organization.
An 11-year-old who is on an IEP and whose distance learning program is going splendidly. I'm also the legislative chair of SEEK and the co-chair of government relations for our national organization of COPA.
And Jeff's back.
Jeff, are you back?
Yeah, hi, everyone.
Finish your introduction.
Sorry for the technical glitch there. My name is Jeff Forte. I am a special education attorney. My office is located in Shelton. I'm the secretary for the board of SEEK, and my wife and I also have a child on an IEP.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. And we are really honored to have a special guest tonight. We have Beth Bai, the Commissioner for the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood. She's going to discuss how the Birth to Three system works and its relationship to special education in Connecticut. Welcome, Commissioner Bai.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
I will tell you our mission at SEEK is to advocate, educate, and legislate for the 80,000 children in special education in Connecticut. We also work on behalf of the kids with 504 plans and the kids who should be identified but are not. You can find out more about SEEK at seekct.com. Please consider signing up on our website in order to receive ongoing information from us and letting us know you're out there. Just a reminder, we are a nonprofit organization. We are all volunteers, but we do accept donations on our website as we do incur some operating costs in order to lobby in Hartford and increase our accessibility to our audience. Your donations go directly to those activities. In fact, because of donations from our Seek This Week audience, we were able to hire a Spanish translator for last week's Education Inequity webinar. And if you missed that webinar, it's posted on our Facebook page. Our next webinar is going to be Tuesday, May 19th at 7 p.m. It is What Will School Look Like When the COVID Closure Ends? That will also be translated in Spanish, thanks to your generous donations. It's going to be moderated by Andy Feinstein and Jen Laviano. Our panelists include David Scata, the Executive Director of Connecticut Counselor of Administrators of Special Education, Jen Perucchio, the Superintendent of Schools, Old Saybrook, Jerry Fleming, Parent Advocate from Norwalk, Patrice McCarthy, Deputy Director and General Counsel from the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, and Jeff Leake, the President of the Connecticut Education Association. You can sign up for the webinar on our Facebook page, and it will be posted on our website as well tonight. We have 2 more upcoming webinars we're working on. We are going to do a webinar on mental health services and transition. So look out for those. So Jen, give us our disclaimer for our Seek This Week.
Okay, our weekly disclaimer. While several of us are attorneys, this is not a forum that's intended to be legal advice. And we ask you to be mindful of a couple of things. One is that if you post questions on our chat, which we do try to answer, if not in the moment, then at the next week's Seek This Week, we ask you to be mindful that this is a public forum and you may be disclosing that your child has a disability publicly, which you may or may not be intended to do. So we ask you to think about it. And also, please keep your questions general. Not only because this is not legal advice, but we want to make sure that our information is getting to as many families as possible. And so as general as you can keep your questions, we appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. All right, so we are going to talk about what is happening. We need our current guidance from feds and the state. Andy, start us off. What's going on?
Speaker Pelosi 2 days ago introduced a new bill known as COVID-4, even though it's in fact it's the fifth one, with $3 trillion additional in supplemental funds. No money is earmarked for special education, despite some substantial lobbying to do that. On the other hand, there's no language in any way modifying or waiving special ed provisions. Both President Trump and Leader McConnell have announced that they're not going to move the bill, and the president said he'd veto it if it's passed in its current form. We'll see how that plays out. That's really it. The other piece of news I suppose to announce is that COPA today filed suit against the Department of Education to try to block new regulations on sexual harassment and sex discrimination, the Title IX regulations. That's really a little off topic. If you have questions about that, you can certainly look at the COPA website as to that litigation. Jen.
Yes, and that's COPA, COPAA.org, and that was against the U.S. Department of Education. So at the state level, not a lot of news. We are anxiously awaiting the guidance from the State Department of Education on extended school year services. Commissioner Bai is going to be kind enough to talk a little bit about summer camps with us tonight, but the word on the street is we're getting this guidance very soon. I've heard a lot of mixed things, everything from there is definitely going to be distance learning this summer and not in-person extended school year to it may be up to the districts. We're hearing lots of different things. As soon as we get the guidance, we will post it up on our website, and we will be sure to respond to it as we have to all of the guidance so far.
We're also expecting guidance in the next week on kids who are aging out and
Right.
transition services.
Right.
Okay,
Anxiously waiting.
great. And as soon as we get all of that, we will let you know. Absolutely. So again, welcome, Commissioner Bai. We are so happy to have you here on Seek This Week. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us. We know it's a busy time with
I'm
lots
so
of
happy to be here. Thank you for having me, and really thanks to all of you and to the parents at home who are advocates on behalf of their children and so many others. So having been at the Capitol, I can tell you have an impact.
Great. That's great to hear. So if you could just define for some of the people out there who might be new to this whole thing, what is the Birth to Three program?
Yeah, well, the Birth to Three program, it was created by federal legislation as part of the Individuals with Disability Education Act. Part C is the part that's for infants and toddlers, which is IDEA Part C. That's the Birth to Three program. It helps states to operate this comprehensive program of early intervention for infants and toddlers with disabilities up to age 3. Something that those of you who've been through Birth to Three know, that families are really at the core of Birth to Three, that it's a service that is supported by professionals, physical therapists, speech therapists, behavior therapists, but at the core, these therapists are working with parents so they learn how to support their children and advocate for their children. So I think that's really important. We try to practice in children's natural learning environments, that is, Birth to Three comes into the home or they go to the schools. It's a coaching style interaction, and our office has been doing a lot to promote this with the agencies that provide Birth to Three. And it was very much a part of our last request for proposals when signing up new Birth to Three providers, that it's a coaching style with families, and that it's a team, that it's part of a primary service provider is part of a team that works with the family. So we're lucky to have it in Connecticut. I know my daughter was in Birth to Three for well over a year, and was such an important support to me as a parent when I was worried about her development, and I got those supports. So I think it's so important as a part of our culture. And I think during COVID, there are a lot of concerns about Birth to Three.
So Commissioner, I just want you to explain again, I know some families who, again, usually when you are introduced to Birth to Three, it's brand new. So even my personal, I didn't know that birth to three and the agencies, I had no idea they were different things. So if you could define a little bit, just explain how
Yes.
someone doesn't
Yes.
say, I'm the agency birth to three.
Yeah, so at the Office of Early Childhood is the agency that hosts birth to three. We also host home visiting, and sometimes the family might get services from both of those programs. So what happens is if a parent has a concern about their child's development, or the pediatrician has a concern about the child's development, or could be a child care provider that has concerns, we encourage parents to call 211 info line. We call 211 child development info line, and talk about your concerns. We also work with providers throughout the communities to do screening, usually the ages and stages questionnaire, a way that parents can have a list in front of them and say, this is what my child can and can't do based on the age. And then when there are concerns, that child gets referred to birth to three. Now, probably for some of the parents watching out there, your child was referred to birth to three very soon after they were born. You know, there's some kids that are born with very clear disabilities and need these supports. More and more, birth to three is working with young children with autism, because we know how important those early years are, and early intervention is for families and children. So what happens is you get a referral, a therapist or an interventionist will come out and do an assessment on your child and figure out if their disability is at a level that they require birth to three services. Because some children may have speech delays, maybe some physical delays, but they don't rise to the level of the birth to three intervention. And very often those children will sort of be monitored. But if your child qualifies, then you get an individualized family service plan where it says, this is what your child's entitled to. Might be an hour a week of physical therapy, might be 2 speech therapy sessions a week. For children with autism, it can be like up to 10 hours a week of multidisciplinary supports that are coming into your home. But it's often home-based. It can also be at a child care program. And then those services remain with you as you go through the system. If your child makes progress, some children progress so much that they get out of birth to three. If they stay in birth to three right up till preschool, then there's a handoff to the public schools through their early childhood special education program, where they'll do something called a PPT. So they do a different evaluation to see, now does your child qualify for services? I always think one of the saddest things during that transition is, you know, I think in like birth to three, it used to be, I probably don't have the data right now, but I know when I was a preschool director, it was 1 in every 10 children in birth to three was getting some occupational therapy, which is so important for children's everyday living skills, but also really for emotional support in many ways. And then when they get to elementary school or special ed preschool, the number goes way up to like 1 to 100. And so that's a kind of service that is very often offered in birth to three, but not so much after the PPT happens and the public school does their planning and placement team meeting. Often you lose the OT, but I can't say you lose the OT. I'm just saying things change a little bit when you hit the public schools, and there you're entitled to those services through the public schools.
And can you talk a little bit about the actual transition process from,
Sure.
well, actually, you know, I'm so sorry. I'm going to go back just a little bit, because I know even from my personal experience, what happens during birth to three is so important, because you do have birth to three, but then you have different agencies underneath it or different companies that provide the services.
Right.
And there are different level services. I know, for example, in my family, initially it was simply a delay. And during that process, which was maybe an hour, a couple hours a week, we discovered that we probably had more need. Mm-hmm. And then the ADOS happened, which is the test for autism. And once the autism was confirmed, then a different provider showed up and gave us many more hours. So that's
because there is ongoing evaluation, and the professionals, the nice thing is, as I talked about at the beginning, it's really a multidisciplinary team. The professionals that come in connect with other professionals in their agency or outside of their agency who will come you have a legal right to these services once they're determined. And I think Birth to Three does a super job of teaching parents how to be advocates for their children as well, and that carries into the public schools.
And the services can be, like you said, it can be speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. It can be
ABA services. Yeah.
applied behavioral analysis therapy, anything that is appropriate, feeding therapy, you know, whatever happens to be what that young child needs. And then you're right, and also the individual family service plan would be, it's what we talk about the IEP all the time in special education. It's Birth to Three's version of that. So you list goals and objectives just like you do with an IEP. Mm-hmm. You list services just like you do with an IEP, correct? Mm-hmm.
Yes, correct. And that transition to school can be a little bit bumpy sometimes. We've really been working on that with the State Department of Education, and we had a whole work group this last legislative session try to think about ways we can make that transition smoother for families, including when children have birthdays right near the end of the school year, to allow Birth to Three to remain with them through the next September. And that is something that we're actually doing during the pandemic. We have an executive order that allows families to stay with their Birth to Three providers, particularly if the public school is not in a place given all that's going on with the pandemic for that. But the public schools still have the legal requirement to provide the services, but there can be a decision made to stay with Birth to Three given the pandemic. So you don't have all these transitions. And you might say, how's Birth to Three being delivered? How do you do physical therapy during a pandemic? Well, I actually saw a session on video a couple weeks ago at our staff meeting. And the parents are reporting that, I mean, obviously we all want human interaction, right? I'm a little tired of Zooming. I don't know about you guys. But so we miss that. But in fact, parents are responding positively to the tele-intervention. And my college roommate is a Birth to Three provider in Maine. And she said it's always been so hard for her to keep her hands off the kid and let the parents do it because like she knows what she's doing and she wants to model for the parent. And she was explaining to me that during the pandemic, it's been so good for her because she really has to figure out how to tell the parents how to support them with OT, physical, occupational therapy, physical therapy, you know, how to help them learn to roll over or, you know, put them in a position where they can start to feel what it's like to crawl. So it's been a very positive experience, but unfortunately, both the referrals and the acceptance of services has been down during the pandemic. I think people are stressed and overloaded, and parents might have two kids now who are home from school on top of the little one in Birth to Three, and they don't know how to manage it all. But we really encourage people out there, if you have friends that are worried about their young child, that you should call 211, have them call 211. It's up to the parent to make the referral. Because kids aren't going to pediatricians as much, they're not going to preschool, all these ways that they're usually referrals to Birth to Three. And I watched the people on the screen who are parents of children who've been through Birth to Three to validate how important the early intervention is. So 3 or 4 missed months when a child is 8 months old is a big deal if you're trying to intervene for better long-term outcomes. So encourage your friends to take that referral, to do the screening, to better err on the side of they'll come out and assess the child and they won't quite qualify, but better to try because we're going to have a big problem on our hands when this is over with a lot of kids who've missed out on a lot of services that they were legally were theirs, that they had the right to those services, and not just the right, but the value of those services would have been huge.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful too if you, because we've heard this, and I'm sure parents have heard this, but could you explain a little bit why early intervention is so important?
Sure. Sure. Something on the order of more than 80% of brain development happens in the first 3.5 years. So those neurons are making connections, and the brain is figuring out ways to think and do and move and make words. And so those first years are so important. Like so much development happens that, you know, in 4 months as a 1-year-old is more than 10 years between 40 and 50, what happens in that brain. Like we have to know it's both, you know, Jack Shonkoff from Harvard talks about it as a time of incredible opportunity, but also where there can be incredible harm. And so, you know, the more we can help people find out about services, and the 1-800 number for birth to 3 is 800-505-7000. That's 800-505-7000. So if you know somebody who is worried about their young child's development, they can call that number and they'll find out how to get a screening and how to get services. And I'm not saying this to worry people. I think a lot of time it's just like, I have so much on my plate right now. I'll take care of this after the pandemic. But we can't have parents get complacent. And if a parent seems overloaded and they say they can't do it, see if there's something you can do to take something off their plate so that they can get to it. Because there are truly some people that are overloaded. I mean, we know in our office, we've been doing a food survey, and I get, every week I get information, and there are a lot. I'm sitting here in the comfort of my own home. Let me tell you, there are a lot of parents out there who are worried about how they're going to feed their kids. I think it was like a full 30% of families that we surveyed, and we're surveying at-risk families in our home visiting program, but are worried, are out of food and don't have enough money to buy what they need at the end of the week. So things are pretty bad. And of those families, 50% were relying on food share, church pantries, and borrowing food from friends right now because of the amount of economic distress out there. So parents are under real duress. So we have to do what we can to help, and we can't judge them for not getting their kids in services. First, they've got to keep a roof over the kid's head, and they've got to keep them fed. But right after that comes birth to 3, if you feel like you need it. So
Sure.
I hope that's helpful.
I think that's very helpful, and I agree with you, Commissioner. I do understand, again, as someone who personally went through it, it's initially very overwhelming to make that decision and to make that call. But once you do, it's life-changing. It really can. It actually can take more off your shoulders than you think, because
Yeah, I can still remember feeling. I can just remember, and I had my master's in child development, but I can still remember watching the other kids in the infant room crawling around, and my daughter would just be sitting there and thinking, is something wrong with her? No. So, no, there's not. But as a parent, something's bothering you, and you're telling yourself, now you're being silly. If you feel that questioning, go for it. And then once we were in services, our lives really changed, and we got to the bottom of what was wrong, what was wrong with my daughter, which my daughter yesterday graduated with her MSW from Hunter College. So it blows my mind when I think about all that she went through and all of her disability that she's persisted. So there are birth to 3 success stories out there.
That is great to hear. And I agree with you. I think that it definitely is one of those, of all the problems that are happening now, and there are a lot, and there are a lot of things to be overwhelmed by. But this is a situation, if you do have a concern with your toddler, there's a phone number, there is an actual answer, there's a path to go. That doesn't cost a fortune, like it's a service for you. So I absolutely agree. Please take advantage of it, and please get in touch. Now I wanted to, and so you clarified that if someone is in birth to 3 now, because the schools are not open, but if they turn 3, they're still staying on the birth to 3 plan.
Yeah, now that's true till the end of May, which is coming up on us, but we are working on an effort to have it go through the end of June, because no one knew how long this would last. So when we go to make another change, it has to be another executive order, and there are processes that we have to go through. So we're working through that now.
Okay. Great, thank you. And one more thing, everyone's talking about summer camp. You have any information for us?
I seem to be the center of the summer camp storm here. The Office of Early Childhood oversees, we license childcare programs and summer camps that are licensed. Now, more than half of camps are really with municipalities, and they're exempt from licensing by the Office of Early Childhood, but we're the office that the governor is looking to get camp guidance, and we've been working with the Reopen Connecticut education subgroup. And so the governor announced that camps wouldn't open till June 29th. And that, I think tomorrow or at the latest Monday, there'll be an announcement that will update summer camp guidelines and guidelines about sleepaway camps as well. All of them designed to match up with the Center for Disease Control guidance about camps and childcare. That's how we make our decisions. So I think I'll just have to stay tuned. I'm always afraid to say something until the executive order is signed, because we continue to take in new information and process that. We have two things in mind. First is the health of the staff, the health of the children, and secondly, the critical nature of these support services for families that either need to go to work or that maybe need a break, or there are camps that provide very specialized services that are so important in the lives of families. And so we're constantly weighing, public health is coronavirus, but there are other parts of public health as well. And structure and routine is so important for children, as I'm sure many of the parents know. And, children look forward to experiences outside with camps. But if they'll open, but with very strict public health guidance, very small group sizes, screen for temperature on the way in, teachers will all wear masks, and all those things that make it challenging to run the camp. Some are not going to open, but we're giving them the opportunity to open where they deem that appropriate and where parents enroll their children, because the equation is camp has to open given the guidelines and parents will send their children. It's, so camps are making individual decisions and families are making individual decisions.
Can I ask here, you have substantial guidance already on your website about the requirements for camps, the rule of
Yes, we
10,
do.
the rule of 30, the masks, all that sort of stuff. Do you have any sense of what proportion of summer camps are actually going to open? It seems to me that it's the cost of running a summer camp is astronomically higher than it was in the past.
It is higher. I can't say, I can say with childcare as a guidance about right now, about 30% of childcare programs are open. They have very similar guidance and similar questions about enrollment and group size being different. You can't, you can bring in half as much money from enrollment and tuition, but we have childcare centers that are really committed to their families and are really part of this public health response. I can tell you that Governor Lamont was very clear about keeping childcare open for those first responders, the healthcare workers, and even for childcare workers, so people on the front lines, grocery workers, people who are keeping us fed. And he was really clear, and we have a phone line that tracks who's calling. More than half of the calls for childcare to our dedicated line are from hospital workers. And second place is nursing home workers. And third place is home healthcare workers. So those are the workers out there who are saying, I need help finding childcare. So I think the governor, as I know it's stressful on programs and families, but I think the governor's right that childcare really is part of the infrastructure that's allowing for the public health response out there. And I think childcare providers are really part of the heroes that we talk about. They're not talked about as much, but they sure should be. And they're doing it without getting the pay of a lot of other professions. So
That's true. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the panel? Andy, do you have something to say?
I'm not. No, I'm all. No, I thank you very much for that. I will be surprised if most summer camps do open this summer. And what's your sense on municipal summer camps? I mean, a huge number of camps are run by
Well,
the town.
yeah, I mean, they really, I think they probably run the most camps. And that will be up to schools and municipalities that usually run those. I don't think they'll be forbidden by the state. My experience is that municipalities and schools tend to be a little more worried, often more worried than the private programs. But, I think as a state, we've got to understand the economic damage here to these longtime nonprofits that have been operating camps, or, there's an incredible camp for people with disabilities that's not going to be able to open this summer. As announced, they're not opening this summer. And I think of the value that camp adds, and we all have to be thinking about how do we make sure they can open next summer?
Right.
Hopefully by next summer, things are really different. So I think it's both this summer, but then we have to think of the infrastructure, and the infrastructure around camps for children with disabilities is so important to families. So I think we've all got to be thinking about how do we support those organizations over the course of the next 12 months.
Right. Yes, Jen.
Just not so much a question, but something you said really struck a chord, and I wanted to make sure I followed up on it. One of the reasons we decided to ask you to come on is that we know that so many of our viewers are parents of older children who have IEP services, and we also know that a lot of disabilities run in families. And we were hoping, given that you'd reported that the numbers of referrals were down, that families would naturally be listening to us and might think to themselves, wow, I am a little concerned about my younger child. And something you said is really important for us to highlight, which is parents' instincts are usually right spot on. And, you self-doubt as a parent as to whether it's just you or if I'm overthinking it or worrying, but it's so important as parents to trust your instincts on this. And we know that your priorities are all over the place right now. We're all just exhausted and trying to do our best day by day, but we're hopeful that if you have children who are older who have disabilities and you're having concerns about your younger children, that Commissioner Bai's words are very helpful to you. And thank you so much for coming on with us.
Yeah, Jen, I want to add one thing to the parents out there, is that you just said, is like, you want to doubt yourself, walk into a PPT where there are 9 people sitting around the circle who've already decided exactly what they're going to tell you that your child needs. It is, and I have my master's in child development and have worked in schools my whole career. It's one of the most intimidating things, and I'm just going to tell you, trust your gut. They told me for years, oh, it's spring bloom. Oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. She'll be fine. And I knew something wasn't right. And so trust yourself, trust your gut, stick with it.
I think that's absolutely right. That's really, really good advice. I think you're right. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank
We're
you.
going to move on to our next part of our show tonight. We have a particularly, I think she said goodbye. Oh no, she's not on video. There she is. She's still with us. Oh, hello. So our next part, we put something up on our website that we talked about last week. It is called the interim IEP. So Jen, you're going to introduce this, and Julie is going to go through it. And this is something we would like you to look at and we think might be useful for you during this distance learning and beyond.
Yes. So the State Department of Education in Connecticut has taken the position that distance learning and what is occurring during a student's distance learning, if they have an IEP, is not the subject of conversation for the PPT and should not be documented or discussed at a PPT meeting. We have made very clear that we strongly disagree with that position and with that practice for a number of reasons. We think it's essential that parents and teams be talking about what's happening during this time period, especially with the possibility, maybe even probability, that there may be another closure next year for some or all of next school year if there's another wave, if we do open on time. So we feel very strongly that it's essential that you document what's happening during distance learning with your team. So we really just took the page 11 from the state's own forms, which is the grid that describes the services your child receives through the IEP. And we added another I because, in special education, you have to have alphabet soup. So we've made an I for interim, an IEP form for families to use with their districts. Julie, you want to go through it with the folks?
Yes, absolutely. I probably screen shared a little sooner than I should have. You probably
That's
will
all
not
right.
have seen. Sorry, Jen. Yes, so if you go to our website, SEEK, Special Education Equity for Kids of Connecticut, it's SEEKCT.com. You will come to this home landing page, and you're going to go and click on school closures, okay? And up top, we have the information where we're saying, you know, we have SEEK this week every Thursday night. We've got our little donation section. Keep scrolling down below our data collection forms, okay? And then you'll see here in this purple section that we have planning and placement team documentation and forms, and we have a PDF viewer, which is right here, and this is SEEK's interim IEP, which we have dubbed the IIEP. What we've done is listen, we don't need to recreate the wheel when we don't need to recreate the wheel. This is page 11 of Connecticut's IEP form. It is the Special Education and Related Services and Regulation, Regular Education, often referred to as the grid page. And this page, we have gone in and just added some things. We've taken license to do so, and we've called it the interim grid page, if you will. And if you scroll down, you probably recognize this page. We've put our little SEEK stamp on it, and I'm going to read to you what it says. It says, SEEK does not agree with the Connecticut State Department of Education that distance learning does not constitute school days. But we do believe, SEEK does believe, that what students receive during the school closure should be clearly documented. So this form right here is provided for parents and IEP teams to do so, to document what is happening for the distance learning plan, and to have an interim individualized education program on file for any future extended closures. So how do you practically share this information with the team? So I've started doing many PPTs, as many of us on this panel and advocates and attorneys throughout the state have. And in reality, what the PPT teams are saying, because they've received such guidance from the state, is that we cannot discuss this distance learning plan at the PPT. And as what has been happening to me is they'll say, but we're happy to discuss it after the PPT. And so we close out the PPT and we have a meeting still on the Zoom or the, what's the other thing called? The Google Meet, or whatever the districts are using. And we'll discuss the distance learning. So one of the things that you could be doing at your PPT is to say, we would really like to plan and document what is happening during the distance learning. They may not agree to do that. It would be lovely if they do agree, and then you could all fill out this form together, and it becomes what is the plan if and when distance learning happens now or in the future. If in fact the team refuses to discuss the distance learning, you can just say, well, you know what, I'm looking forward to discussing distance learning after the PPT. Let's talk about the distance learning plan, and whether you as the school district fill it out or we fill it out as parents, we are going to be submitting it to the PPT team as an addendum to be considered the interim special education plan, the distance learning plan. And so literally this is just the same exact form that the state uses, but what we envision is that you have, sorry, let me back up for a minute. The PPT team is charged with putting an IEP together as if you were in a brick and mortar building, okay? But we don't know what the future holds. So we think that's great that there's going to be an IEP written for the brick and mortar building, but this is the documentation that can say, well, if it's not brick and mortar and it's distance learning, here's what the plan is. So I will let some of my other colleagues pipe up about this form if there's anything that I've missed or I've failed to articulate.
I think you covered it, Julie.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share. And please, this is a printable PDF on our website, and please feel free to use it.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you very much. I mean, I do have to say, again, we still have more questions than answers about
Right.
what the summer's going to be, what the fall's going to be, what next. Colleges have already announced that it's going to be online learning for a while. So me as a
Right.
non-attorney, just a parent trying to figure out what's going on, I would want a plan, right? I
Right.
would want a distance
Right.
learning plan.
Right.
So I
So
think
doesn't it seem, right, so doesn't it seem, sorry, Babs, I thought you were finished. Doesn't it seem practicable that we have the IEP that's written for the brick and mortar building, and this is the plan that if we're not brick and mortar and there's some hybrid, distance learning going on, here it is. So we'd like to think it's very practical, and hopefully your team agrees to discuss it, but be prepared that they may not, because that's the guidance they've received from the state.
well,
I do want to mention there's another modality, right? There's the brick and mortar modality. There's the distance learning by computer modality. And then there's the itinerant teacher modality, where a teacher or a therapist comes into your house. That's been rarely used so far in Connecticut. It's been more widely used in other states. But certainly there are therapists who will go do home visits, follow the right precautions and do it in a safe manner. And that is another service that, particularly in a distance learning environment, you can ask for.
That will be a good problem for us to solve if that actually happens, right? So that would be,
Yeah.
right.
so, all
That's
right.
the point, Andy.
I do think, I think that's, again, please take a look at the form. We are trying to find solutions for what's going on. And again, I just think a plan is better than having no plan. And at least documenting what's going on. We have the data collection form. Now you can have, this is the amount of services I'm getting right now in this distance learning plan. Even if for the first couple months, it's just for yourself, fill it out, just so you know. So.
Right, and if I could just add one more thing, the parents can ask when they're having these Zoom or Google Meet meetings for the meeting to be audio taped, which is not a bad idea to ask for. And also, I probably failed to say one thing, and that is when you're asking when you're asking to discuss distance learning and they refuse, you can say, I'd like your refusal to put on prior written notice, and that's probably not a bad thing to do as well.
And Julie, can you just explain a little bit what prior written notice is?
So prior written notice is one of those things that I wish they called it something different, because it's a very confusing term. But essentially what it means is before the action takes place, parents have to receive notice in writing of what is about to happen. And so it's on the prior written notice page, it says, actions proposed, actions refused. And so if you've asked for something and the IEP team refuses it, they have to document not only the fact that they are refusing it, but they also have to say the reason that they're refusing it. And if you go to the IEP page, I forget, what page is it, guys? Is it page 3 on the IEP, Connecticut's IEP?
It might be 4, 3 or 4.
3 or 4.
3 or 4. You'll see it's a grid, and they also be very mindful of the fact that they shouldn't just be saying no. You should be asking for the reason that they're denying you the opportunity to develop a distance learning plan.
Okay. Thank you, Julie.
Sure.
All right, we're going to move on to some questions. Just so you know, our webinar last week, the inequity webinar, we had Commissioner Cardona on the panel, and we got a number of questions that weren't related to equity during the webinar. So we said we would send them to him, and we did. So we had sent over 30 questions and topics. You can actually read the letter that we sent to Commissioner Cardona. It's on our website. Commissioner Cardona will be our guest 2 weeks from tonight on Speak This Week. So so we're looking forward to having him. So you can also send more questions, but we have a lot to talk about in 2 weeks. So let's get into our first question. This is for Jen. This is from Christine. Christine says, I would love some guidance regarding my 5th grader. At the end of our meeting last week, school administrator told me, quote, there are no IEPs being implemented at this time, end quote. This after I was pleading for some type of video instruction help support. He has a very extensive IEP. Town is not lending any type of support via Google, Zoom Meets, Hangouts, any of it. As a result of school closure, they are recommending ESY, which he has not attended in 2 years. So instead of offering support, they want him to attend ESY, which again, this will fall on me to implement. Any guidance or suggestions are warmly welcome.
So these are the kinds of questions which we receive, which make us all cringe, and which we promptly notify the people at the State Department of Education we've heard, because this is not in keeping with any of the law at either the state or federal level, nor the guidance, frankly. During this closure, the U.S. Department of Education has made clear students are still entitled to receive a free and appropriate public education to the maximum extent possible. And so a blanket statement such as we're just not doing any IEPs during this school closure is simply not in keeping with either state or federal law. In terms of the extended school year response, this is a very complicated topic about when recovery services will be made up for students in terms of that piece of what they were supposed to get during the school year, as opposed to extended school year eligibility. On the website, SEEK's website, we have the topic brief from the State Department of Education as to extended school year eligibility and the standards for those. So it sounds to me like your school is suggesting that they're going to make up for the lost time this spring over the summer, but that may not at all be what's appropriate for your child. So this is one of those cases where we would certainly say that your school district is not permitted to simply say we're not doing anything for your child with an IEP for during the time period that schools are closed.
Okay.
It's not acceptable.
Thanks, Jeff. So the next question is for Jeff from Jennifer. Can someone discuss the vast differences offered from one town or city to the next? Is the state tracking this? If not, why not? How many children have an IEP per town or city, and how many of those children are receiving virtual services and when they began, etc. For example, after 8 weeks of being out of school, our district has only just begun to offer virtual services this week. And on top of that, the educators are ill-prepared, unable to figure out the functions such as how to share the screen or how to set up and send an invitation for Google Meet, etc.
Sure. So there's a couple of questions in there. I'd like to try to break it down into 3 sections, right? So the first question really has to do with data. And by that, what I mean is, where can a parent find out information regarding the number of children within their district that have an IEP? Okay. So I wanted to first guide the parent to that question by going to the Connecticut State Department of Education's website. Within that site, there's a site called EdSite, which is what the CSDE uses. So from a high level, right, there's 206 districts within Connecticut. And of the 206 districts, there are about 1,500 schools, all right? If we go to students with disabilities, which is the pull down right here, and we were to look at all of the districts, right? You can look at all the districts. These are all 200 districts. And if we were to look at all of the disabilities, you can find within your district the number of children, not obviously their names because it's highly confidential under FERPA, but you can get a sense for the number of children that have been identified within your district that are receiving special education services. Now you can export this file and you could find the trends. it's usually a year or two behind, so we don't have all the information here, right? But you could see that it's by all 200 districts. Now, if we go to a trend report, you can see, you know, the number that we usually throw around is right now there's about 80,000 children within the state that have been identified as having an IEP, okay? Now, the other thing that's interesting, if you want to look at this, we recently had a program on inequity, and granted, this is old because this is from 2017 to 2018, but you can see here the blue is the, you know, this is by race and ethnicity. So there's an overwhelming high percentage of white children, over 50%, that are being identified as a child with a disability. If we look down then to Hispanic children, it's under 30% that are being identified. And then if we look at African American children, it's under 20%. Now, you know, this is some data that's not current, but you can go on to EdSite and get a lot of this information, which I think is very useful. So that's the first part of the question. And if we go here, you could see down here that there's been about 35% on average over the last 4 years of children that have been identified with a learning disability. Autism has actually had a bit of an uptick from about 10% to 15%. So again, you know, we'll post this link on SEEK's website, but you can go into your specific town, for example. Let's check out Berlin, just randomly. And you can see that in Berlin, there are currently 407 students that have been identified with a disability, which is about 15% of the overall student population. So that's kind of the first part of the question. The second part is something that Brian Klimkowitz with the State Department of Ed recently issued. And he goes into providing various records that parents can use with their school team. So the second part of the question is, are districts keeping track of the number of virtual services that are being provided? Well, they should be. And under FERPA, you should be entitled to receive that, because the guidance that was recently issued by the Connecticut State Department of Education is that there should be a parent communication record, okay? There should be a service record of the distance learning, and those service records look like this. And we're gonna put all this up on our site. There's the continued education opportunity plan, and districts are allowed to use their own, but it really should emulate this. So if you're not receiving this granular level of your child's education opportunity plan during this distance learning time, you should be asking the district to be using these forms, okay? The last thing that I just wanted to share is that yesterday, the commissioner sent an email to, or sent a memo to all the superintendents indicating that under the CARES Act, Connecticut, thankfully, is going to be receiving over $111 million in funding towards education. And of the $111 million in funding, $99 million is being distributed to our local education agencies or local school districts. And it's being used to ensure that appropriate technology and connectivity is going to be used to address gaps and safety of reopening of the schools. I do have here the allocations by district as to who's getting what. Thankfully, a lot of the districts that are in our inner cities are receiving a very good portion. So, you know, I've kind of highlighted them here. Bridgeport's receiving close to 10 million. Danbury, 2.3. You know, some are receiving less, obviously. Hartford's receiving 10 million. Greenwich, not that it's an inner city, but Greenwich is receiving about 850,000. New Britain, 5 million. New Haven, 8.5 million. Norwalk, 2 million. And so on. Waterbury, 9 million. A RESC, which one of the RESC's aces, who probably needs much more than this, is receiving 330,000. So it adds up to this. Now, districts will have to apply to the state to get it, but at least some support, quite substantial amounts, are underway based on the commissioner's application for funding under the Federal CARES Act. So, you know, it's kind of a large answer to a multi-pronged question there, but you can go on an Ed site to get your district's information. And then the recent guidance that the Connecticut State Department of Ed issued regarding distance learning plans and the service record is something that your district should be using. And if they're not, we're going to have all this on our site. You know, use this on your school teams. Thanks, Babs.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
I've got to supplement that a little bit. First, the state only issues guidance. Districts have complete discretion as to whether to follow that guidance. And I think it's, I was on a conference with the commissioner today about that, pressing him on that issue. It is absolutely clear that very few districts are using those forms, and the state is not forcing them to use the forms. As to engagement in distance learning, the state again has put out some information on that. There is no collection of that data. There's no aggregation of that data. That's critical that we have that, but the state refuses to do it. The CARES Act stuff and the press releases is somewhat disingenuous. The CARES Act is self-executing. It says that states get a certain amount of money based on Title I distribution, and it's distributed among towns based on Title I. The uses that are permitted under the CARES Act are 12 general uses, and that money can be used for any purpose tangentially related to education by local school districts. It can be used to reimburse the police department for the cost of the state review of the resource officer. It can be used to light an athletic field. There is nothing earmarked for special education in that. And while the commissioner attempted to focus the money in his cover memo, he has no legal authority to do so. So it is not as good a deal as it should have been.
Okay, thank
I
you.
just want to quickly say, I know Jeff mentioned FERPA, that's the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, and a RESC, which is the Regional Education Service Centers. So just wanted to add
Thank
that.
you.
I know
Thank
that was a lot that you talked about, Jeff. So I just wanted to add that in case people.
Well, that's why, again, these are recorded. So you can go back and you can play them again. And also, I forgot, I need to do a shout out to some of our other amazing SEEK members who are on our Facebook chat right now and are answering questions. And that's Jerry Fleming and John Flanders and Helen Taylor and all kinds of amazing people who are helping us out. So thank you for that. Next question is for Andy from Hillary. My daughter's speech pathologist sent us work to do with our daughter because she cannot do Zoom based on her personal situation. And the district said they cannot force her to do speech via Zoom. I understand the situation, but some of the materials I received don't make sense to me. I tried to run some of the materials because I want to help, I did reach out to the speech therapist. She explained some of the materials to me via email. Does the state plan to give us back the hours when school resumes? Are they considering parents as specialists? What are the plans for summer school, especially when it comes to speech?
There's a lot there. In terms of the speech therapy, and Commissioner Bai talked about this earlier, it is really good that parents learn how to work these therapies with their own kids. And you should pester the speech pathologist as long as it takes and as much as it takes to understand what you're doing. Are you being considered as a specialist? Yeah, you are. You are the specialist in providing speech therapy to your child during this period of closure. It's unclear to me whether you're saying that your daughter can't do speech by Zoom, or the speech pathologist won't do it by Zoom.
I'm not sure.
Speech pathologist should be doing it by Zoom. If your daughter can't do it by Zoom, that's a different matter. Giving back hours. Compensatory education is not hour by hour calculation. Generally, it can be. What the test is, what kind of services are needed to restore your daughter to the position she would have been in had she had the appropriate services during this period of time. For things like speech and OT and PT, an hour by hour return of services makes a certain amount of sense, but that's not what the law is. What are the plans for summer school? First, we don't know exactly. We're expecting generally that summer school will continue to be distance learning in most cases, and so the modality of instruction, the modality of speech therapy you have now is likely to continue during the summer. That's the best I can do now. Wait 24 hours and we may have a more clear answer on summer schools.
Great. Thanks, Andy. All right, our next question is for Julie from Vanessa. What about 504 plans? No one contacted me. My child is supposed to be receiving social group. We got nothing.
Okay, so just in case for those people who are watching us who may not know what a 504 plan, it's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. It is a plan that provides your child accommodations around a disability that doesn't rise to the level of requiring an IEP, an individualized education plan. It's a federal anti-discrimination law, Section 504, which basically says we recognize the fact that you have a disability, but it doesn't rise to the level of adversely impacting your education. So your child may have accommodations. Now, under these circumstances, the accommodations may be the same or they may be different because you're not physically in school, and that's going to be highly individualized around your child's special education plan. I'm sorry, 504 plan, sorry. 504 plans do sometimes include some services, and in this case, as the parent is asking, they're receiving a social skills group as a part of the 504 plan. If you have received nothing, this is a very practical answer. You must reach out to your school team and say, where is the social skills group? What is going on with that? And have a discussion with the folks who are supposed to be implementing it and ask for that to happen. It seems like an overly simplistic answer, but I really don't think it gets more difficult than that.
Great. Thank you, Julie. All right. Last question for Andy. This is from Cassandra. And Cassandra is writing from Waterbury. Is there anyone that gives support for this region for parents to come together and maybe sign some kind of petition with the understanding of how it might help, seeing we have a large population of parents who are afraid and do not use resources? Also, are you suggesting the parents should write or email the governor? I think that would be nice, but first, as a parent, the first thing is to understand what we are asking for. Andy, you're muted.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes, right. Send letters, send emails, send them to the governor, send them to your state senator, send them to your representative, send them to Commissioner Cardona. They have a big effect. And, you know, every time I'm with one of those people, they report to me on communications they've gotten from people. They do have an effect. Now, as to groups in Waterbury, we will send you an email with some contact information to organize. Waterbury's it's one of the really troubled districts. Waterbury has an astonishing number of students who have not even made contact with the school since closure. It's, and we're seeing this in a lot of the urban districts, although some of them actually have real engagement programs outgoing. Waterbury does not. But it's not so much engagement, it's that your district is not providing the services that it needs to provide. And only by being very squeaky wheels can you get them to provide the services. There's nothing special that you should be asking for. You should be asking for what you need.
Great. Thank you, Andy. All right. We are going to go around with our takeaways because that's it for our questions for right now. Again, don't forget Commissioner Cardona will be here 2 weeks from tonight. So Jeff, why don't you start us off? What's your takeaway for this week?
Well, so with everything that's going on, I've actually started to look at how schools in other countries are handling their reopening, because some schools are planning to. And Canada, actually, our neighbor, is doing some very interesting things right now where they're putting out videos to parents in advance to advise them about what's going on. And we're already kind of getting glimpses as to what Canada is trying to do. They're opening schools where elementary school desks are going to be 6 feet apart. And they're inviting children and their parents in voluntarily to see what the new school classrooms are going to look like after they've reviewed these videos. There's going to be no sharing of school supplies. There's going to be playgrounds are going to be off limits. The gym, the library, the cafeteria will all be closed. And this just kind of came out in the last couple days. So it's going to be interesting to see how we as a country roll this out, but then also obviously at a state level where Connecticut's guidance is going to be coming in. But, we should be getting this information soon. So my takeaway is really looking at other countries to see how they're doing it and seeing how we can implement some of their best practices or learn from their mistakes while they're starting to do this.
Great. Thank you. Andy, what's your takeaway this week?
The current state, the pre-March 13th state of education in Connecticut was not good. When we're moving towards reopening, we should not be looking to recreate that system. We should be looking to completely reform, change, revitalize education in Connecticut. And the really good news is that the Department of Education shares that vision. We have a commissioner who really understands the problems in education. We don't agree with him on a lot of issues, but he really has the right values, the right openness, and what a blessing it is to have Miguel Cardona as our Commissioner of Education at this time.
Great. Julie, let's hear your takeaway, please. You're muted, honey.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I was talking about the IIEP. And I think as we look to the future, none of us really knows how long this could be going on, but it could be going on for a while. And the reality is we may continue to have some sort of hybrid brick and mortar / distance learning, just go to distance learning. Nobody knows. So I would just stress that parents, when they're in their IEP team meetings, say to their school districts that they completely disagree with this notion that these are not school days and that we cannot discuss distance learning. We've got to have that backup plan of when, it's ideal that you're developing an IEP for when we're in brick and mortar. But the reality is that if you go to distance learning, it's unlikely that the full IEP can be implemented, and it just seems practical to have that IEP. I know that's something I discussed, as part of what my question was, but I feel really strongly about it, and I wanted it to be the takeaway.
Great. Jen.
Okay, so here's my takeaway. Very often in PPT meetings and in conversations with school districts, we find ourselves having to make the point repeatedly that education is more than just academics, that there are so many other aspects of a child's school day that matter, like social interactions, like non-structured activities, extracurriculars, etc. And I'm hoping that we will never again have to say to a PPT, education is more than just academics, because if anything has been highlighted during this school closure, it's how very much students and teachers need the non-academic portion of the school day for other kinds of vital development, particularly socially and emotionally.
Great. Thank you, Jen. All right, my takeaway is echoing Commissioner Bai, trust your gut in all things, birth to 3. If you have a toddler, you have concerns, again, it's something you can actually find a solution to. Please call birth to 3. If you really, this distance learning plan isn't working for you, or you just want to, document it, trust your gut in every PPT, trust your gut. It is your best friend. Okay, so please listen to yourself. I want to say that concludes our Seek This Week. I want to thank you to Commissioner Bai for joining us for tonight's show. It was really terrific. And also thank you for our other Seek members who are monitoring the chat on Facebook. We will be back next week to offer updated information about what we hear from the feds and the State Department of Education and how that impacts your child's plan. Reminder, next Tuesday, 7 p.m. is our webinar, What Will School Look Like When We Come Back? It'll be very interesting. So it'll be a very interesting webinar. Please sign up. You can sign up on our Facebook page, and you can sign up on our website, seekct.com. And also on our website, if you take a look, just a gentle reminder, please, we are a nonprofit organization. We do gladly accept donations. Our webinar next week will be live translated in Spanish, thanks to your donations. So I think that's all I got for tonight. So thank you very much. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.